Excited about getting on with our exciting agenda, and we are now at item 14, and that is our innovations in transportation presentation on understanding goods movement through data. Bridget, can you introduce our guest?
Gladly. Commissioners, tab 14 is an informational item. Nick Bowden is the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Replica, a data platform for the built environment. Mr. Bowden will showcase the capabilities of Replica's tools by sharing several applied examples. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Bowden.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the Commission for the opportunity to present. And thank you, Bridget, for the introduction there. As said, my name is Nick Bowden. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Replica. I'm going to give a brief overview of who the company is and what we do, and then jump into some specific examples to leave time for questions. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, we refer to ourselves as a data platform for the built environment. I couldn't help in listening to the agenda hear all the examples of these complex urban environments described in the meeting today. Supply chain, how do we measure equity, how do we handle climate? And the reality is all these problems are what we would describe as multi-variable problems. They include transportation, they include land use, they include economic activity, they include people and households. And traditionally, kind of the data made available to public agencies to make these kinds of decisions has been very siloed. So you might look at one set of mobility data over here, and a set of land use data over here, and a set of economic activity data over here, and you've got to try to piece all that together. And our approach has largely been, can we actually bring all that together in such a way that as groups like you all and public agencies try to make these really hard, complex decisions in a near real-time environment, can you look at one particular place to get this kind of information to inform those decisions? Next slide, please. So as I kind of say a little bit jokingly, but data is not going to solve the supply chain challenges. Data is not going to solve congestion. Data is not going to make cities more walkable. Data's role in this process is to be a piece of information, a piece of insight that ideally allows you to do a couple of things. And the way that we think about putting data into practice when we work with agencies is first, we want to understand and create a common operating picture. So what's happening in terms of all the elements of supply chain? The second bucket would be, now that we have that common operating picture, how do we try to understand and monitor that issue in real time to identify things like policies or physical interventions or levers that we, whoever the agency is, can pull to positively influence that particular situation? And then the third really important piece is, how do you then use that data to evaluate whether or not the decisions or the levers that you pulled are working, and how often and how long can they work for? And so this is kind of data in practice versus just having lots of data, and lots of data in and of itself oftentimes doesn't lead to better decision making. Next slide, please. I'm going to give 3 specific examples of how Replica data, given that we have nationwide land use at the parcel level, nationwide mobility metrics across all modes, nationwide access to economic activity, nationwide access to lots of different elements that we kind of piece together in our platform, it allows for these kind of complex problems to be better understood across the entire dimension of the problem. So one example of this is try to understand the supply chain in California ports. Some of these primary factors in this vein of a common operating picture might be things like, what's the offboard vessel count? What's the time of idling? When those vessels get on, how do you understand things like congestion and freight movements? How do you understand changes in freight origin and destination pairs? How do you understand whether or not all the way downstream, those kinds of challenges are actually affecting things like consumer pricing, amount of money being spent? And that's just the primary kind of factors. Of course, you get into the second factors, which are things like air pollution, increased truck traffic and idling trucks in neighborhood streets that typically aren't there, safety issues, right? Consumer goods. And this is just one kind of problem set. So one example on the next slide that you'll see here is being able to actually use Replica to pull all of this various data together. Oops, next slide, please. Into one kind of California-wide or Los Angeles-specific port, where we actually can look at in near real time all of those things that I mentioned. So how many ships are offshore? How does this change week over week? How does it compare to a year ago? How does it compare to a week ago? And most importantly, because the frequency of update in our data set is every single week and every single day for the whole US, you can actually see if the things that you're doing to try to unclog, the supply chain are actually working. Can you isolate those down and say, we made a change, whatever X change may be, and now we want to monitor whether or not that change is effective, maybe at one port, and if it is effective, can we apply that to a second port? So that's just one example of how this kind of interdependent element of bringing all this various data together at very, very kind of low levels of geography and really high kind of frequency of updates can actually help you solve this kind of problem. Next slide, please. Another example of this is obviously there's been a lot of talk about the infrastructure bill. One of the big elements, and I think mentioned in one of the updates, GoBiz and others, right, actually being able to implement some of the electric vehicle charging money that's coming down for both site selection and implementation. Again, in this vein of how do you get a common operating picture, right? Those are things like, where do current charging stations actually exist? What's the utilization of those? Are those located on place with particular link volumes and trip patterns that are supportive of their use? Are they equitable? Do they change VMT, right? What's their surrounding kind of household income? So land use for identifying those particular sites. That might be the first step of pulling all this data together. Of course, the second step would be then to start to implement those new sites. And then the third step is, can we actually monitor and see if where we put those locations are effective? Are they achieving the outcomes we want? Are we getting people to use them? Are we increasing equity in the things like EV acceleration? So a second kind of case study is around EV charging infrastructure. Then next slide, please. And a third example of this, which of course is close to home. We've had the opportunity the last 2 years to work very closely with Caltrans, California Air Resources Board, and SACOG on using replica data to better understand and update with more fidelity, both in space and time, VMT. Part of the way that that's possible is because of the mechanism by which we produce the data we do. We have what's referred to as disaggregate or privacy-friendly data. And so to be able to look at individual trip patterns, individual kind of VMT actually allows you to aggregate these up in lots of different kind of unique ways to get a better view of the world. And so the household survey data that was used for VMT, that map is on the left. You can see when that's augmented with replica data, it actually changes the picture, which then may affect things like policy decisions or implementation. And I'll just do really quickly in the last minute here on the next slide. People ask us, how is this all possible? And there's kind of two parts. One, we have a really large set of data inputs that we use, from location data to consumer and resident data to land use data to economic activity data. And then we also integrate things like traffic counts and transit counts to make sure that the data we produce actually reflects what's happening on the ground. And the very last slide, and this is unique, and the reason I show this, next slide, please. Our approach, this looks complicated, but I'm gonna try to boil it down to why this is relevant. We take all those data inputs, we use a significant amount of algorithms and models to scale those inputs up to produce what you just saw in terms of all the data. Why we chose this approach is because we're now building a product called Scenario that actually lets public agencies change the conditions and then run scenarios on what might happen if they make a particular decision. So the last piece I'll highlight, and then I'll stop talking and take some questions if folks have. We've worked very closely with New York City, MTA, and the state of New York over the last few years on congestion pricing. Obviously, I think in LA, there's a desired implementation of the right naming convention, which is traffic reduction, but it's referred to as congestion pricing in New York. And using all of the data and the ability to run these kinds of scenarios out, you can start to ask questions like, what does happen if it's a $10 charge or a $20 charge? Does it disproportionately impact certain parts of the population? Do we need to change the hours of operations? There's all these kinds of things that you could do. So that was a really quick overview, Madam Chair. We're happy to take questions. Hopefully that was helpful for the group.
Yeah, I will, there's no public comment and I'll open it up to my colleagues, but before more sign on, I would like to find out a little bit more about how you see doing some of the scenarios for congestion pricing.
So congestion pricing is very complicated, and when it comes to scenario, in part because it deals with behavior change. And so the example that I always give is, depending on things like transit availability, and we'll use something like a low-income household, a significant change in the cost, let's say to go into a particular zone, actually could result in someone choosing to move residential locations or change children's school. And so there's a lot of sensitivities around kind of how accurately you can produce kind of, forecasted impacts. But the primary focus oftentimes around those kinds of scenarios is, what is the existing mode availability that those people have? What's their existing trip patterns and the purpose of trips and the time of day of those trips? And then you can start to implement things like, the cost of the trip changes, right? And who's impacted. And then that gets you a little bit of insight into, what you might expect from a behavioral change perspective. And so it's both policy, kind of physical intervention, and then mode choice models that really allow you to test some of those kinds of policy frameworks.
That's great. I see my colleague, Commissioner Alvarado.
Yeah, when we get into this, like managed lanes and congestion pricing, and I see all this data flashing before my eyes. The one critical point that I don't see is the origin of the trip.
Mm-hmm.
So we know there's a lot of people in downtown San Francisco, LA, picking. We know from 9 to 5, there's a ton of people there. So from 9 to 5 or from 7 to 7, we're going to make that your $10.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't find out, nowhere in that is, okay, well, the majority of the people aren't coming less than 10 miles.
Right.
The majority of the people aren't coming between 10 and 20 miles. What we're seeing is, in reality, people are coming from an hour, 2 hours away.
Mm.
So the game's rigged against them. You're punishing people who can't afford to live in the urban core for having to come there to go to work. So we've got to find a way to include that data in all of these determinations on what is the origin of the trip. What is the income level of those people making that trip? Because you're penalizing middle and low income people. So let's not forget about those folks who make our beds, who take care of our kids, who do all those jobs that don't require a degree. And I'd like to see more about that. And I'd like to see that included more as we go forward in all of this data-driven policies.
So I just want to acknowledge the importance of that, and then just give a really specific example of that was of high importance in New York City, as you can imagine, as they went through, first getting the legislation passed to allow congestion pricing to occur. And we're relatively unique, Commissioner, in that regard, in that we actually pair trip maker and household characteristics, so things like income, race and ethnicity, educational attainment, vehicle ownership, job type, with the movements. And the first thing that we produced in New York were state legislative boundaries. And we looked at all of the people that would be impacted by hour of day across income cohorts, across educational attainment, across race and ethnicity, based on different implementations of scenario pricing or congestion pricing, to actually get to that kind of the heart of that question you're describing, which is like, let's actually get a really good, I use that common operating picture a lot. Let's get a really good operating picture of who and how and when are going to be affected if we make this kind of change. And so I think it's a really important point that bringing that level of detail into the assessment, which just for a long time hasn't been possible, can be done and can be done well.
Because I was looking at your electric vehicle charging stations, how you want to make sure that equity exists across all neighborhoods. You're not going to find a lot of electric cars in East LA or West Oakland. It's because people can't afford them. You're going to find a lot of electric cars, Silicon Valley, and more prosperous areas. So I don't know. Just for me, it's a very personal thing that we not forget, and we don't penalize those people who struggle the most.
Thank you very much for that observation. Commissioner Davis and then Commissioner Liu.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on Commissioner Alvarado's point about lower mid-income folks. I mean, I think the comment was made, if the fees are too high, then they can decide to move. Well, if they can't decide to move, their next move would be to go be homeless, which just exacerbates a further problem that we've got in the state. And so we got to make sure we're not doing those kinds of things. The slide deck that we actually were provided, and I know you're trying to go fast through stuff, but you talked about the California ports in one of the slides. You guys, did you do any sort of expanded research on what the lack of warehouse space has done? And you talk about not enough chassis. We already hear all the stories about not enough drivers. I always say the reason there's not enough drivers is there's not enough wages. But that's, a perspective. I look at a lot of things, but what about warehouse space, and how would additional warehouse space, hopefully closer to the ports, but regardless of where we got to build the warehouses so we can move it, did you guys look at that at all, and how that would relieve, I don't know, Joe, how many boats do we have out there now? 90? Get it down to 50?
I checked today, but there are about 100 out there at all times nowadays.
Something like that. So, thank you.
Yeah. Commissioner Liu.
Well, I was just wondering if Nick had a response to Commissioner Davis's comment on warehouse space, because it's a interesting question.
The way that I would describe kind of our work is, we have all of the building level use and parcel level use, building use and parcel level land use. So kind of two factors for, call it the whole state of California, and for the whole country, plus all of the movements. I'd say typically we're doing less of the identifying the various levers for the agencies to pull, as an example of that, and doing more of how do we surface this data in a way that can inform something like you just described, Commissioner Davis, which is, hey, what might happen if we had better access to warehousing in a given place? Does that actually reduce congestion because it reduces, the distance that trucks have to drive to get from point A to point B, or does it change the routing of the various roads? So our research is typically more in the realm of, how do we make sure we can get all of the data that folks like you would need to best understand that problem, to be able to then identify these various levers that might be pulled, and then because we update that data so frequently, be able to give you a feedback loop back to say, hey, it turns out you decided that prioritizing warehouse space closer to the port actually did have a positive effect, or it didn't have a measurable effect. So that's typically where we sit, kind of in the, I'll call it the decision-making apparatus that is, companies and public sector and commissions and agencies and kind of various departments.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Commissioner Liu, for making sure that we had time for the answer to Commissioner Davis's question.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an important question in part because, throughout this supply chain crisis, we've pretty much been at, capacity at the warehouses, and they're parking containers wherever they can find a place, waiting for warehouse space to open up. And I think, being able to use data to figure out, and of course, Commissioner Inman's going to know a heck of a lot more about this than I am. Data to figure out how to maximize efficiencies throughout what we call the system of systems is a complex thing. And the warehouse issues are even more complicated because, they tend to be located in low-income communities of color. And especially in the Inland Empire, that is, bears a huge impact from the entire supply chain logistics industry. So that notwithstanding, that wasn't my question. My question had to do relatedly a little bit about equity. And so thank you, Nick, for talking to me previously when we had a conversation. And then I asked some questions before the meeting. But I want to pin you down a little bit more on the equity index question. And I know because I asked you, and the reply was kind of some skepticism about how indices are used to aggregate data when a lot of the power in what you do is from disaggregated data. And I understand that, but I think you also have to appreciate that in the end, we as decision makers and the others who are involved in transportation planning and decisions and project development, we need to prioritize, right? And we need to incorporate equity considerations into project selection and project development, and the types of where we target our investments, and even where we need to support workforce development and historically neglected communities or impacted communities, and just all these different things, making land use decisions, how we develop our policies and guidelines. An equity index, I think, can help us, if it's done right, with all those types of decisions. So if we did ask you, if you were in charge of developing with Caltrans and CalSTA the equity index, how would you go about doing it? How would you use all this data that you have access to create the best equity index that had all the things we need to consider when looking at transportation equity?
Yeah, good. It's a really good question. And I think my comment on kind of indices and their use is they tend to lean towards simplicity over usefulness. So they'll give you a score like 71, right? And 71 is this kind of amalgamation of a bunch of data that it may or may not kind of apply in a way that actually leads to what you described, which is just better intervention, better policy, better investment, whatever the case may be. And so I think as it relates to measuring equity, there's lots of things to look at. And I always try to start, I think, in our work with agencies is what are the outcomes you as an agency are trying to achieve? Are those reduced commute times? Are those more affordable housing? Are those more mode options, right? There's any number of other things, right, that you could kind of boil equity down to. It could be access to food, access to schools, access to employment, any number of things. Once that's established, right, then the job then is to connect the data to the outcomes in such a way that really decision making, I think, in your realm tends to be a choice of trade-offs, which is what am I willing to live without in order to get something? And so by having, if it's 10 data sets connected to 10 various outcomes, then a tool like Scenario should allow you to say, if I do this, I might get outcome A, but I want to be aware of the fact that I'm actually maybe going to move outcome B further away from where we want to be, just by the nature of what you described as kind of a system of systems. And so I'll give a specific example and then I'll stop on this. I think the REAP program is at the state level, is a really good example of targeted investment to create more affordable housing with the intent of also ideally reducing per capita VMT with those investments. And so looking at data that would look at existing land use, existing mobility trends, existing housing costs, existing access to transit, right? Looking at things like parking availability. Parking availability is one of the single biggest contributors to congestion, especially when it's free and largely available everywhere. So that's an example of a data set. You look at existing incomes, existing VMTs. Those might be 10 or 12 different kind of data sets that you surface around the idea of creating equity through a targeted investment program. And then as you make those investments, really monitor which of these variables move, right? Do they move in a positive light? Do they move in a negative light? And then I think over time, maybe the last thing is you might be able to boil that into a single number that says this neighborhood is a 65 and this neighborhood's a 75. I just think when it comes, that's relatively straightforward things like walk score. I think equity is complex enough that it's really difficult to try to boil down to something that is simple but may not be useful. So hopefully that was a helpful answer to like how you might see kind of plugging data into a complex problem like that.
Yes, absolutely. I think that was a great answer, and I would encourage Caltrans to listen back to this and pay close attention, because I think you're absolutely right, and then focus on what are those different types of variables that we want to keep track of during equity. So thank you for that answer. Very helpful.
Commissioner Inman, thank you, Commissioner Liu.
Thank you, Chair Norton, and thank you, Nick, for the presentation. We advertised it as Understanding Goods Movement, and clearly your presentation included more in that. And to Commissioner Liu's question about warehousing, I think even further breaking that down in terms of e-commerce and the differences of how we all live in an e-commerce environment, and the warehouse demands are very different than the old distribution hub warehousing, and everybody's on to omni-channel right now. I'm particularly interested in the work that you do and other entities. I know of several other groups that are trying to do similar work, and you look at the multiple variables, I think you called it, multiple variable challenges or problems or opportunities, depending on what label. And how do we collectively agree on, if we're going to build those indexes and, try to measure our success? I mean, I've done this a little bit just independently, looking at the supercommuters and really saying, okay, it'd be my desire not to have any supercommuters in our state, because I think commuting 90 minutes one way is way too long for anybody to do. And so as you try to peel that back, clearly you mentioned housing, and we know that we have a housing crisis and a housing shortage. But I would love to spend more time on this, Madam Chair. Maybe if we bring back, when we can come back together, our technology forums and those workshops we used to have. I think that there's a whole body of work here that we can all benefit from, sitting around tables and talking about how we really get some good measurements so that we can move the needle and make a difference. And to Commissioner Alvarado's point about the chargers, I think, we have to be careful of, are the chargers are in certain neighborhoods and not other neighborhoods. And, what are we really learning from that? And what's the causal portion of that? So anyway, thank you for your presentation. But I would offer we have a ton more work we could all be doing.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I wanted to ask a couple more questions. One is, you were able to get some household information, but I was wondering if you were able to get gender information. I mean, women traveling differently impacts. So many women have had to leave the workforce because of childcare issues and inability to work from home. So that's question one. And then my question two is, many of us are participating in a broadband study and how the impact of lack of broadband is affecting ability to reduce VMT. So I was wondering if you had, how you would look at what Replica could do as a way of addressing some of the connectivity between expanding broadband and reducing VMT.
So to the first question, we will have, if you think about the attributes in the census of gender, employment by industry, anything that is generally in the census, we also have in our data set. So the ability to filter things like trips by gender, by income, by race and ethnicity, by trip distance. We talked a lot about supercommuting and housing prices affecting supercommuting. Be able to actually look at some of that. Just as an aside, because I have to mention this around active transportation. You look at major cities in the U.S., and there could be upwards of 10 to 15% of all movements are single occupancy vehicles going less than 2 miles.
Wow.
So as a mechanism of trying to influence things like VMT reduction and equity, and just being able to filter and kind of slice and dice data in such a way that can give you kind of really specific kind of insight into particular problems, I think that can be really powerful. I don't know if we've looked specifically at broadband coverage and its possible either correlative or causal factors to things like trip distance, but it's actually a really interesting takeaway for us to see if there's something there. I know there have been lots of hypotheses about any number of things that can reduce VMT. Obviously, in a perfect world, and we saw this a little bit, although it's come right back, right? When everybody was working from home, or those that had the ability to work from home, you actually saw kind of the plummet in VMT. And that suggests that, at least in certain industries, right, that certainly can serve as a VMT reduction, but people quickly made that up with other trips. We joke it, we refer to it as the afternoon like Walgreens trip that never existed before COVID, but now all of a sudden people are going at 3 p.m. to the grocery store or to the neighboring store to get something. And so there's just kind of net new reaction of VMT that got created. And so I think it's a really good thing for us to look into. And we haven't historically, but I think we will now.
Thank you. Fascinating. This is all very, very interesting. Justin, are there any public comments on this item?
Chair Norton, I'm not seeing any public comment at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Well, with that, we really look forward to following up with you on this fascinating presentation. And we thank you for giving your time and your expertise to providing more information as to what we do to move the needle forward on sustainability and reduced VMT.
Thank you to the Commission and Madam Chair.
Thank you. With that, we're going to move to item 15, the state and federal legislative matters. Paul?
Yeah, good afternoon, Commissioners. Tab 15 is an action item to accept the staff report on state and federal legislation. Staff is not recommending the Commission adopt a position on any bills at this time. The legislature recently reconvened on January 3rd for the second year of the 2021-22 legislative session, and to date, only a handful of new transportation bills have been introduced. The deadline for new legislation to be introduced is February 19th, so staff will have an updated report on all the new transportation legislation at the March Commission meeting. Additionally, as you heard in several of the earlier reports this morning, the governor's proposed budget was introduced on January 10th. I won't go through all the proposals again in the interest of time, but provide additional detail if you have questions. Also, as you heard from Executive Director Weiss, Commission staff plan to bring forward additional comments on the budget proposal at the March Commission meeting. I would just reiterate that at this time, staff is focused on understanding how the new infrastructure funding from the general fund that would flow through CalState and Caltrans would be coordinated with Commission programs and accountability processes, as well as trying to learn the specific details regarding the suspension to the gas tax inflation adjustment and its impact on Commission programs. Finally, just to round out my remarks on the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding, you heard earlier from Acting Secretary Knopf on the process that CalSTA has set up. I've included in your book item a schedule of the working group meetings, and Commission staff are participating in all of the working groups, and we will be reporting back as those discussions continue. So with that, staff recommends you approve this item.
Thank you. We have some people that would like to speak, and I would like to start with Vice Chair Alvarado.
Okay, I'm just thinking, I'm looking at the agenda and we got BMT coming up. And then we're looking at state and federal matters. We had a discussion earlier about the suspension of the gas tax and backfilling. Let's just move away from that conversation for a bit. And let's talk about instead of forgiving the gas tax, it's combined relief and VMTs.
Yeah.
We know that we could take 50 cents off the gas tax. Gas is not going to go down 50 cents. Take $1 off the gas tax. Gas is not going down $1. So we can take this percentage off the gas tax. The gas tax is not going to go down. So why don't we take that? And it was mentioned, I can't remember now, what was it? Like $500 million is what they were looking at.
Yeah.
So instead of relieving the gas tax of $500 million, let's talk about leaving that proposed increase in place so that we can still spend the money on transportation. Let's take $500 million off of our surplus, put it in a fund, and use that as an incentive and education process on vehicle miles traveled. So here's $500 million. If you register your car, like we all did during the pilots and you take, because we're trying to implement the VMT, you send your stuff in or you register, however it is we did it before, and you get a rebate from the money that you would have spent on the tax. And yet you don't impact what we have to do on the CTC side. So you're creating a fund, you're using it to educate and make aware of the vehicle miles traveled registration. And I think in the long run, people are going to find out, wow, that amount of money wasn't really that much to me anyway, personally. Right now, it sounds like we're going to forgive the gas tax, and there's going to be this windfall that you can pay for next Christmas. That's just not going to happen. But we're educating people on two things. Again, how we're going to implement VMT and how little the impact of that increase is to the individual's budget for the year. Just kind of something to throw out there as an alternative.
Yeah. Paul, did you want to comment on?
Anything.
No, I just say, as I mentioned, we're going to bring back additional comments for the commission, so we'll certainly take that idea into consideration.
Thank you. And then you're going to add the one I discussed about adding to ATP as well?
Yes, I heard that earlier too. Yep.
These alternatives that Commissioner Alvarado and I and others are talking about, I think are worth putting in the hopper. And I do know that we have, I think Commissioner Liu wanted to speak, and then I know that we have a public comment right now. Justin, why don't we go to public comment and then see if Commissioner Liu will turn on his video to speak.
Thank you, Chair Norton. We do have one attendee looking to make public comment at this time. We have Kiana Valentine.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Kiana Valentine on behalf of Transportation California and our labor management member organizations. Want to let the Commission know that earlier today we submitted officially our opposed position to the Governor's proposal to forego the annual inflationary gas tax adjustment in the next budget for many of the reasons that have already been discussed today. But I did want to highlight a few key points that are fundamental to our opposition. First, let me be clear, though, I think that we recognize the desire of the governor to provide relief to California consumers. I don't know about you. I feel it at the grocery store as much as at the pump when I'm filling up my vehicle. Inflation has, caused meaningful impacts on Californians across the state. And so our letter communicates our opposition to the method in which he would bring consumers relief, but support for the concept of providing some relief to Californians. So I do think that is important. When we passed SB1, one of the fundamental reasons a inflationary adjustment was included in the bill was during the intervening period, the 20 years between the last gas tax increase and SB1, inflation and fuel efficiency had eroded our purchasing power by 50%. And that has led to the almost insurmountable backlog of projects and inadequate funding on both the state and local systems, let alone addressing climate change adaptation, let alone all of the other things facing our transportation system, expanding transit, expanding bike and ped facilities, et cetera. So we just think it's bad precedent only 3 years into the annual inflationary process to stop that now. I could not agree more with Commissioner Alvarado. Fuel prices are not guaranteed to decline just because you eliminate this inflationary adjustment. And I think it was Director Weiss who mentioned that consumers will only realize $1 something a month. We calculated it as the average Californian saving just upwards of $15 a year. So I'm not sure if that really moves the needle in the way that California consumers need it. I want to reiterate that as we read the proposal, it does require a true up next year. So it's just going to require us to catch up in 23-24, making it all the more politically difficult and harder for consumers to stomach. Say the budget is drafted in such a way that the true up isn't required or it's delayed another year, then you start to see compounding effects on the revenue generated. Last thing I will say is that I think we want everyone to consider this proposal in the broader context. And the COVID-19 pandemic has already reduced state transportation receipts in the last 2 fiscal years by $1.6 billion. So this is $523 million on top of a loss of $1.6 billion. Comparing that to our needs on the state and local system, which are still underfunded by over $14 billion annually. So again, recognize the motivation, concerned about the bad precedent, and we think ultimately the industry thinks there's a better way to try to help consumers out in the next budget. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Liu.
Yeah, I think we need to make sure that the commissioners and the staff are CC'd on that letter. So Kiana, if you can do that, that would be great. I think, you know, what I'm hearing from staff is they want to wait till March before we give them any hard and fast marching orders on this. And I can appreciate that. And I know this process is going to play out. I do think that, you know, it's clear that the commission would like to direct staff to pay close attention to this issue, to raise awareness about what the variables are and the consequences may be, to pay attention to what people are saying and how the nuances and how this proposal may be worded. And I think come back to us in March with some ideas about what we might want to do about it. So I appreciate that the staff is going to track this closely, obviously, and all the matters that Paul was talking about. So I don't think it's necessary for us to actually take action at this time, but probably anticipate doing so in March.
Thank you. Paul, appreciate your comments, Commissioner Liu. Paul, is there any last thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
No, you know, I think Kiana raised, you know, a lot of good points in her remarks, and just, again, we'll be kind of looking at it more closely. You know, a lot of the details still haven't, kind of the specific language hasn't been released yet, so we want to see what that looks like, and we'll certainly keep in mind the alternatives that you and Vice Chair Alvarado suggested.
Thank you so very much. Appreciate it. We have you for the next 2 items. So let's go to the next item, number 16, budget and allocation capacity.
Yeah, Commissioners, tab 16 is the regular informational update on the Commission's funding allocation capacity on transportation revenues and on the state budget from Keith Duncan of Caltrans's Division of Budgets. I think you're muted, Keith.
Yeah, we still can't hear you. Nope, nothing. Brandy, is there any way to get Keith's mic to work?
Keith, our system is showing you need to enter the audio pin.
Perhaps Mr. Keck is on the line to step in and bail Keith out.
Mr. Keck?
Anybody from Caltrans.
Do you mind if we go to item 17 and then come back to 16 once we get your mic working?
So Keith is also presenting 17.
Of course.
Oh, if I may, Madam Chair, Caltrans is actually here, but if we could just move on to the next item and come back once Keith is working. Keith's mic.
Great.
Great.
So we're going to move to the next item that Keith is not presenting on, and that is item 18, and that's the presentation of the draft 2023 Active Transportation Program Guidelines. Lori Waters. Hi, Lori.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Tab 18 is an information item for staff to present the draft 2023 Active Transportation Program Guidelines. The draft guidelines are provided as an attachment to the book item. This is the 6th full cycle of the Active Transportation Program. Staff is bringing forward the guidelines as an information item at this meeting to give the Commissioners and the public an opportunity to provide feedback before guideline adoption at the March Commission meeting. Shortly after guideline adoption at the March meeting, the call for projects will be released. The draft 2023 Active Transportation Program Guidelines are included as Attachment A to the book item. In the book item, stakeholders can also find a link to a version of the draft guidelines and track changes. This version shows changes to the guidelines as compared to the 2021 Active Transportation Program Guidelines, and this link will be available until January 31st. Before starting the guideline workshop process, staff consulted with the Active Transportation Program Technical Advisory Committee, Commission Executive Management, and Caltrans Active Transportation Program staff to determine what changes should be proposed to the ATP guidelines in order to keep improving the program. All those consulted agreed that minimal major policy changes should be proposed this cycle, as it is likely that many unsuccessful applicants from last cycle would apply again. By minimizing any major changes, these applicants can focus on updating their public engagement and make any necessary improvements to their project and applications before submitting again this cycle. Keeping major policy changes to a minimum also gives staff the opportunity to focus on improving the guidelines where they are unclear or inconsistent and addressing stakeholder concerns. With that approach at the forefront, staff has held 6 guidelines workshops with the ATP stakeholder group beginning in November of last year. One of these workshops focused on helping stakeholders understand what makes an application a PSR study report equivalent and was co-hosted by Caltrans ATP staff. During the workshops, stakeholders strongly supported not making major policy changes this cycle. With that said, any issues that stakeholders wanted to discuss were thoroughly debated amongst the participants. Ultimately, after these discussions, most stakeholders prefer keeping existing policies. A couple of examples of these discussions include if we should continue scoring on applicants providing leverage on a proposed project, and if we should institute a non-infrastructure project funding set aside. After talking through these proposals, there was not enough stakeholder support to make these changes. There is one substantive change proposed by stakeholders that staff will be recommending. The stakeholders requested that we adjust the threshold size for infrastructure projects. The stakeholders believe this is necessary because project costs continually increase. This request was strongly supported by the group. So staff is proposing to raise the threshold for a small infrastructure project to $3.5 million or less in total project cost, the medium infrastructure project to over $3.5 million up to $10 million in total project cost, and for the large to be projects over $10 million in total project costs. A few other guideline revisions to note are the following. The program is continuing to urge applicants to consider how their proposed project will support existing and planned housing by encouraging applicants to apply for the California Department of Housing and Community Development's Pro-Housing Designation Program. Also, staff worked with the Department of Aging to add appropriate language that supports applicants considering the needs of older adults in their projects. Staff would like to note one change to the guidelines that occurred after the meeting materials were distributed. Some stakeholders raised concerns about the use of the word enforcement in the context of non-infrastructure projects in the program because it has negative implications. Leaders in non-infrastructure active transportation program policy, such as the Safe Routes to School National Partnership, have removed the word from their materials and placed it with terms such as partnerships. Staff and the stakeholders agreed that the active transportation program should also replace the term enforcement with something that is more in line with the types of non-infrastructure projects we fund. The version of the guidelines attached to this book item still include the word enforcement, but it has now been removed. Staff anticipates that the guidelines before you today are substantially what will be brought forward for adoption in March, with the exception I just noted and a few other anticipated changes. The Quick Bill Pilot Program guidelines still need to be revised through working with a small group. We're meeting with the small group soon, and the revised Quick Bill Pilot Program guidelines will be ready for March adoption. Additionally, Commissioner Liu has made some suggestions for guidelines revisions that staff will work on appropriate language for the final guidelines. This includes asking applicants that are proposing projects located within less than 500 feet from a roadway with more than 125,000 average daily vehicle trips to describe any project design elements intended to minimize exposure to air pollution, or explain why the proposed project design is necessary.
Yeah.
Lastly, I want to acknowledge Beverly Newman Burkhart, who really did the lion's share of work on the guidelines this cycle. She showed much patience, grace, and professionalism in working through all of the questions and comments from our executive director, who was very involved in the ATP guidelines this cycle. That concludes my presentation. And again, this isn't information, but I'm happy to answer questions and take comments.
Thank you, Lori. I'm very pleased to hear about the impact of seniors and the other items that you described. I see Commissioner Liu and I see Commissioner Gardino ready to speak. Commissioner Liu?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Lori, thank you for explaining my request to do a little bit of a tweak to how the safety item is scored. I brought this up the last cycle and said, we were too far along. It was one of my first meetings, and told to wait 2 years. So I have, and I'm back. I'm asking for, I just want to make really clear to people, I'm not trying to prevent any active transportation projects from going in. I just want to encourage people, if they have the discretion, to move the project away from a heavily traveled roadway or freeway, even, some amount of feet, 500 feet would be best or more. But if you can do that, you're going to reduce the exposure of the people using that infrastructure to air pollution and to what studies have shown to be really important impacts. And in fact, if I'll try to just remember this, 1 microgram per cubic meter of air of per PM 2.5. The interpreter I feel sorry for, but 2.5 microns of particulate matter and smaller. When COVID hit, even that small little amount made it 15% more likely that someone would I think I can't remember if it was die from or contract COVID. I think it was actually die from COVID. And so if you move your project just a few feet away, that might be the difference between that 1 micron per cubic meter of PM 2.5 exposure. I'm happy to go into details with folks. I don't want to ding people if they can't move the projects away, but I also want to encourage them to try to come up with ways of doing it. My other comment had to do, and I think this is not for you, Lori, but more for Caltrans. In the version that I read, it had this enhanced oversight program item in it. You said that's been taken out now, which I understand we're not doing it. It's a Caltrans program. But if Caltrans, I think people should be aware that my understanding is that Caltrans intends to try to assist local governments to make sure that they or applicants to deliver on these projects, to select some of them, and then sort of, get involved in how the projects get developed and implemented. And so I think we should at least talk about that so that people are aware of it and that it still exists. The fact that it's coming out of the draft guidelines just means that it's not a CTT program.
Yes, and we have someone from Caltrans that can respond to that. I think Kathy McKeon should be on to explain more about the enhanced oversight.
As long as
Thank you, Lori. We do have Kathy on right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good afternoon,
Kathy, you're
Commissioners.
free to
My name is
comment. Thank
Kathy
you.
McKeown. I'm the Chief of the Office of State Programs with the Local Assistance, and I am over the ATP program, and I'm going to address the question by Commissioner Liu. Thank you for the question. The Enhanced Oversight Project was a coordinated effort, and I like your word, to assist the agencies in making it through the process successfully. We will be reviewing the projects as they come in and try to identify those that are at high risk, including those that are complex or have environmental concerns or right-of-way issues or audit issues. Any of these criteria could flag them as a high-risk project. And we did start this effort last year, and it now covers projects in cycles 3A, 4, and 5. And when these projects are selected, we do, as a successful application, and we identify them as a needed project for this enhanced oversight effort. We at the DLA headquarters notify the districts, and they in turn notify the applicants that we are here to assist them. And there are many ways that we assist them, including having frequent and attending their PDT meetings. So I know that there was some question about how we evaluate the program and whether it's successful. And one of the examples of an indicator that we use to track enhanced oversight success is the allocation of the funds, particularly allocation of construction funds before the deadline. Our current effort also includes quarterly project delivery status meetings, and over time, we do plan on beefing up these different ways that we evaluate the program to evaluate whether it's successful. But to date, we have about 13 successful construction phase allocations among 70 projects that are currently on the list, and we consider this a success to date. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm here if you have any others.
No, absolutely, it does, and thank you very much. It sounds to me like this is an important part of your program and a good addition to make sure that these ATP projects actually get done. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to call on Commissioner Gardino, and we have 2 public comments subsequent to when I said we had no public comment. So.
Thank you, Chair Norton, and Lori, thank you for your continued leadership and passion for these issues and your ability to bring together stakeholders in such a thoughtful, successful way. We all benefit because of that. As everyone knows, in our December 15 annual report to the legislature, in the recommendations section, we made a pretty bold and I think very appropriate recommendation for a one-time allocation of $2 billion for active transportation funds so that we could catch up a bit on all the worthwhile projects that we were not able to fund in the last cycle and to prepare us for another cycle. It was heartening to see in the governor's January 10 proposed budget $500 million for additional active transportation funds. But I would just like to encourage folks who are listening and who care deeply about these projects and this effort that we just let people know that if they would like to communicate with their members of the legislature and legislators with whom they have close relationships, done in a respectful way between now and June 15th's constitutional deadline for budget adoption, it would be, it might be helpful so that we're rallying grassroots and grass tops around our state to weigh in on that proposal.
Well said, Commissioner Gardino. I want to make sure we hit the 2 public commenters, but I think it is important that we are still seeking the $2 billion, as Commissioner Gardino highlighted. 1.5 for ATP as it's currently configured, and 500 million for bike corridors and bike highways. So thank you for continuing to highlight that. Justin, if you could have our two public commenters speak.
Thank you, Chair Norton. We do have public comment at this time. Up first with their hand raised, we have Patricia Chen.
Thank you. Good afternoon, amazing Chair Norton and incoming Chair Eager, incoming Vice Chair Guardino, Commissioners, Secretary Kim, Acting Secretary Knove, and Director Weiss and Director Omishakin. And you all deserve good adjectives by your titles as well. And I apologize if I missed anyone on the virtual dais. I am Patricia Chen with LA Metro. And Metro values the ATP and the projects that provide timely and much needed benefits to local communities and regional first last mile commuters. And we value the staff's excellent work on a transparent process to fine tune the guidelines. Overall, we are very supportive of the intent, approach, and language of the guidelines. I am speaking this afternoon on proposed new language, which would no longer allow for scope changes after the allocation of construction funds. We agree that scope changes can be an area of concern for the Commission in enforcing the commitments represented in the grant awards, and that some additional structure in the guidelines may be needed to support fair and consistent actions. We would, however, like to maintain a predictable and secure project delivery environment if possible. And one way to do this would be to modify the proposed scope change language to allow the flexibility to address project delivery realities by requesting minor scope changes, which I believe are those that maintain or increase project benefits on a case-by-case basis. Thank you for your consideration, and I thank staff for their expression of willingness to discuss this matter further as they prepare to bring the guidelines forward for adoption in March.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Lori, do you want to comment on that now, or would you like to add it to the mix for the March response?
I can comment on it now. So this is actually, it's not really a revision in the guidelines. The guidelines before were silent on this, on when scope changes can be asked for. So I would say that the Active Transportation Program is a competitive program, and projects are evaluated and receive a score based on the scope that was programmed. Commission staff and Caltrans staff understand that scope adjustments occasionally may need to be made during the project development process, which is why we developed the scope amendment process. However, it is not appropriate for implementers to be making scope changes after construction allocation, so Commission staff would not recommend this proposal at this time.
Thank you very much for your feedback on that. Justin, I think we have another public comment.
Yes, thank you, Chair Norton. Up next, we have Jonathan Matz. Jonathan, you're free to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Matz with the Safe Routes. Jonathan Matz with the Safe Routes Partnership. Just a very brief comment, speaking up in support of the draft guidelines, and more than anything in support of the extraordinarily thorough and wide-ranging outreach that CTC staff does with the ATP. As with every cycle, this is the third or fourth round that I personally have been involved, and I never cease to be amazed by just how to what lengths staff, and obviously led by Lori, but also Beverly and Alika go to, and I'm sure I'm missing others, go to in order to make sure that stakeholders are able to voice their preferences for the programs. And there are some issues which we kind of revisit every cycle, and obviously, like, everybody has a few changes they would like to see, but I think broadly speaking, the process results in a program that I think reflects truly the broad shared vision of stakeholders across the state. So my compliments on that, and looking forward to getting a great crop of applications this cycle.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your comments. I think with that, we are done with comments from the commissioners and the public. So let's thank you very much, Lori, for that very thorough presentation. We look forward to hearing more from you in March. And I'd like to go back to items 16 and 17, because I think Keith Duncan has his computer working.
Am I coming through clearly now?
Yes, but faintly.
Faintly? Okay, I'll try.
Commissioners, this is Stephen Keck. I would like to step in for Keith. He appears to continue to have some problems with his audio today.
Okay.
I won't pretend to have as much detail as Keith does, but I'll do my best to fill in.
Thank you.
We can go to the presentation, please.
For 16, budget and allocation capacity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So this slide is one we talk about every time we do a commission meeting. This is the allocations through the last commission meeting, which was in December. At that time, we had allocated approximately $2.4 billion of the total capacity of $8.2 billion, which is about 30% of the total capacity for the year. If we can go on to the next slide, this 30% is a little lower than we would see and have seen in the past. This year is a little bit slower start. I want to assure the commission that we're working with our own programs and with local agencies as well to get a good handle on this. I can tell you from the shop side, which is about half of this capacity, we're looking at delivering another 230 projects this year in excess of $3 billion. So on the state side, the delivery is coming a little bit later in the year than we had seen in the past, but we do expect to be catching up here in the second half of the year. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is another recent update that we've been giving to the commission to compare as we're coming out of these very strange times with COVID, to compare where we estimated revenue would be and where we're actually coming in. And the good news on this, and you'll see it also in the governor's proposed budget, is that revenues are coming in a little bit higher than we were expecting coming out of COVID. Actually, I think one of the earlier presenters talked about this sort of replacement VMT that we're seeing, where folks are taking trips, maybe not to work, but to the grocery store or other places. So we're seeing consumption mirror that. Overall, revenues are up about 2% over where we would estimate during this part of the year. So for the first half of the year, they're about 2% higher than what were estimated during the May revise last year. Next slide, please. So there's been a lot of talk about the governor's proposed budget. It was released on January 10th, of course. Specifically to the department, we are looking at a new budget of about $20 billion. So that's a very significant number. It's a huge round number. It is, of course, the largest budget this department has ever seen. We have changes in all three categories of appropriation. State operations is the support of the department. Those are our people and our equipment. We're looking at just a 5.6% increase in that area. And it's really on the capital outlay and local assistance sides where you see a very significant increase in the proposed budget. And that is due to the funds coming in from the bill or the IIJA. One thing I want to make sure the commission is clear on, these very large increases in capital outlay and local assistance, you're not seeing the same sort of increase in state operations because the largest piece of our state operations is capital outlay support. That's the support directly towards those capital outlay projects, our engineers. And our workload for those engineers is requested as part of the May revise. So at that time frame, we'll see a much larger increase in the engineering services to support this capital outlay program. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this chart kind of shows similar information to what we just saw, but this is a little bit more detailed. It's actually quite small and hard to read. I apologize for that. A pie chart breaking down how the department allocates all the funding, or rather how all the funding is allocated for the department. The two first blue pies are capital outlay and capital outlay support. Those are the fix it first type of projects that we see up and down the state. The second largest piece of this, almost a quarter of the pie, is local assistance. That is not the local assistance program within Caltrans, but rather that funding that goes out to local agencies for their transportation projects. The third largest pie, of course, is maintenance and operations of the state highway system. Then we have rail and mass transit investments. Planning programming is a little tiny piece, and then others such as legal and other pieces of the department. So as we might expect, 3/4 of this budget is going towards projects, either their development on the state side or to local agencies, and another almost 20% is going to maintenance. So really the bulk of our project budget, the department's budget is focused on fix it first. Next slide, please. There's already been quite a bit of talk about the governor's transportation package, so I won't get into that. I think Acting Secretary Knoth did a fantastic job of detailing the transportation infrastructure package that was put forward by the governor. But we wanted to highlight two of our budget change proposals moving forward. The first is a very large undertaking by the department. It's a 2-year, $176 million per year move to update and begin to replace our Caltrans fleet. This is our equipment fleet. We are very much behind in where we need to be to update this fleet, and have completed an extensive planning process, gotten buy-in from all the appropriate agencies, and are moving forward with a request for a very large request just to kickstart what's really going to be a 10-year plan to replace our fleet and update it to be electrified as much as possible. We also have in our budget a proposed 2-year increase of $3 million annually to support the Senate Bill 339 road charge pilot, which of course we'll have much greater discussions on that at the Road Charge Technical Advisory Committee. And then, as has already been discussed quite a few times today, there is the proposed inflationary increase pause, if you will, or holiday as it's been called. I think a lot's been said on that already. I won't add any to that conversation, and I'll just move on to a federal funding update, if you will. Slide, please. There's also been quite a lot of talk already about the IIJA component. The investment in transportation. Huge increase in funding to California, about $1.8 billion in the current year, increasing at a rate of about 2% per year moving forward. I think Paul said it best, and I second everything he said about how complicated this is. We are still getting guidance from Federal Highways. There is a very big disconnect between the apportionment types that we have and how we can move forward with those, and the actual funding that we have, that obligation limitation that Paul talked about. That needs to be connected, and it needs to be connected very soon. We're hoping in that mid-February timeframe. Until then, we've got a checkbook, but we don't have any money in the bank account, or at least we have only about a quarter of the money in the bank account, and that's a very important distinction.
Yeah.
A very big highlight that I don't know has come up yet, and I'm pleased to be able to be first with this news. Normally, if Vince was on, he would steal this from us. So, Paul, thank you for leaving this. We received recently more than $600 million, I'm sorry, just under $600 million in emergency relief funding just recently. I don't have the exact date in my brain right now, but this is reimbursing California for money that we spent going back a decade or more on emergencies that were declared emergencies, and we had been paying for out of our own funding in hopes that one day we would get federal relief. $600 million is the largest amount we've ever received for emergency relief funding. And as I mentioned, it goes back a decade or more to projects that occurred. Mostly these would be storms and wildfires that caused damage to the system. So that $600 million is in addition to the $1.8 billion we're getting to the IIJA. So a tremendous boon on the federal side. And Vince isn't here to take credit, so that's even better. Actually, so that's the end of the presentation. I take it the next slide first ask for questions, which I will do my best to answer, and maybe even Keith has his audio working, which would be awesome.
Am I coming through now?
You are.
I am so very sorry.
No problem. We have no public comment at this time, but we do have a couple questions. One of them, while I see whether my colleagues who also want to ask questions, is that I know you say we've gone over this issue about the impacts of the gas tax holiday, but I do think it would be important to hear from you about your perception of the impacts of the gas tax holiday on SHOP and STIP projects.
Yeah, thank you. So I think the gas tax holiday comes at a pretty good time to consider something like this, right? With the increase in funding coming from the IIJA and the greater than expected revenue intake from our normal gas taxes, this is a good opportunity to look into this kind of proposal. At the same time, we're also saying increase investments in transportation from the general fund. So while it's not a direct backfill, it's kind of like an additional boon from the general fund to sort of counter this proposal. Impacts to the SHOP and to the STIP, we would not update the fund estimate, for example, to take those impacts into account until it becomes the law. The fund estimate itself is based on, is required to be based on existing law. Mm-hmm. So this proposal obviously would have an impact. It's $500 million, would have an impact on both the SHOP and possibly the STIP, although the impact to STIP would be fairly minor because it's a small part of the taxes. But as I said, it's a good time to do that because of all this other money coming at the same time would more than offset any potential decreases from the tax.
Okay, I see Director Mitch Weiss just jumped on, so I'd love to have him talk. One of the other things I did want to ask before I forget, you just pointed out the $600 million in emergency relief funds, and I just wondered how those are going to go back into the system. Where did the funds come from before that, like, paid for the emergency relief at the time, since this seems to be a reimbursement, and what's happening with that flow? But before you answer that question, let's go back to Mitch Weiss.
I just want to touch on two things Stephen said. Once I really want to reiterate one thing he said, which is once the budget's passed, then we'll be able to look at the details of which program is impacted and come up with how we're going to address it and what projects might be impacted. As far as if you have to get less funding, when you have more from other sources, it may be a good time. I think we still have to question the benefit of a cut that, in 2 months might save me enough for a light rail ticket to the office, and then in another 2 months I'd have saved enough to get home from the office.
Okay. That's helpful, very helpful. Did you want to say anything more on that? And then I wanted, again, to come back to that $600 million and what's going to happen with it and how that's going to be seen, maybe coming out through other programs, since it's going to replace funds that were expended before.
Sure. Let me first say, Mitch, we do offer subsidized transit tickets so that you could buy more than one. But with regards to your question on the 600 million reimbursement, a portion of that, and I don't have the exact number, I think it's close to 100 million, which Keith does, and he'll follow up with this.
Yeah.
Some of it goes to local agencies for their expenditures, but for the state side, all of those emergency relief projects come out of the shop, and they're allocated generally under what they call the G11 process. So we use those funds in an emergency basis as a delegated authority from the commission. And then, so when we receive this money, it goes back into the shop to make those expenditures whole. So this would be adding back into the shop capacity. And for Keith, if you could give the numbers and how much goes to the local agencies, that would be great.
Yes, overall, it's a little over 595 million, with a little over 500 million for the state, for the shop, and about 95 million for local agencies.
And how will those be distributed to local agencies?
It'll be based on, as Stephen mentioned, it covers about 16 different events dating back to 2005. So what we've done is we've gone through each of the submissions for each of those events, those submissions to FHWA and any of the agencies that submitted federally eligible costs. Those are the ones that will be getting the funding for, and it'll be flowing through our local assistance program. And I believe that process has already begun, and they've notified the local agencies of that.
Okay, if you could send us some more detail on that, where those are going, which local agencies are getting the funds, that would be very helpful for us.
Great. Be happy to work with staff and get that to you. Thank you.
Thanks. Colleagues, are there any other questions that you might have? If not, we will move from item 16 to item 17.
Thank you, commissioners. I will step out and let Keith do his thing. Thank you very much for indulging our little mishap.
Absolutely. Thank you for subbing in.
So commissioners, tab 17 is an informational item on the draft active transportation fund estimate, which will determine how much funding is available for the upcoming cycle of ATP funds, which Lori in a previous item just talked about the draft guidelines. So with that, I'll turn it over to Keith to go through the fund estimate.
Thank you, Paul. And again, to everybody, I'm very sorry for those technical challenges experiencing. Thank you, Lori, for your flexibility for jumping in out of order. Again, Madam Chair-elect, Commissioners, as Paul mentioned, Keith Duncan with Caltrans Division of Budgets, and I'll be providing the overview for the 2023 Active Transportation Program Draft Fund Estimate today. Next slide, please. In general, when it comes to a fund estimate, the fund estimate is a forecasting model just basically to project what the available funding is over the 4-year period for this ATP fund estimate period, identifies what commitments are available, and then funding minus commitments, what's left, that's available for future capacity for additional projects that can be programmed for the upcoming ATP cycles. Overall, when it comes to the forecasting model, there are assumptions we do build in. The first assumption when it comes to overall revenue or funding levels, we are planning to keep state and federal resources remain stable throughout the fund estimate period. We know we have set state funding from the passage of SB1 through the Road Maintenance Rehabilitation Account. We have legacy funding coming through the State Highway Account, as well as now with the passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the IIJA, we have set funding coming through the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. So we're able to have that solid funding to be able to provide for these upcoming 4 years for the next cycles. The adjustments when it comes to prior commitments, the fund estimate is, and we'll touch on this in a moment, fund estimate is spread over 4 years. So the first 2 years of this fund estimate period, there are known commitments, known projects that are programmed. And then for the outer 2 years, while projects are not yet programmed, we hold a reserve for those future cycles so we can continue to program projects in the outer years. Next slide, please. Overall, the table in front of you is a breakdown of that estimated available capacity over the 4-year period. As previously mentioned, we have the total resources available of a little over $260 million, up $261 million a year. As previously mentioned, related to adjustments. For the first 2 periods, we have about $123 million for program projects for this last cycle. And then we have $100 million identified for the outer 2 years for 25, 26, and 26, 27 to be reserved for the 2025 ATP cycle. I do want to apologize for the provision of a late, I believe it's a pink revision to the ATP fund estimate that was presented today. On Friday, the previous draft, we did not take into account that reservation of $100 million a year in those outer 2 years. So the recent draft that was provided to you, we did incorporate that. A little bit of miscommunication, so I sincerely apologize for those challenges. And then there at the bottom, you can see how the distributions are made to both the urban, small urban and rural, as well as our statewide competitive total based on population. Next slide, please. The next steps in this active transportation fund estimate process will continue to work directly with CTC staff as we finalize numbers. We know that the intent is to present a final ATP fund estimate to the Commission for adoption at the upcoming meeting in March. We continue to receive information, as Stephen mentioned in the previous presentation, as he subbed in for me, as well as Paul Snyder early in his presentation, as further details come available related to the various formula funding with the passage of the BIL IIJA. We're going to be able to come to a final number as to how much the annual transportation alternative set aside for the ATP funding. So we'll be able to identify that for sure. And then we'll also, when it comes to the adoption of the fund estimate, it'll occur, the plans are for it to occur concurrently with the adoption of the ATP guidelines that Lori has previously presented. Next slide, please. And with that, again, I want to offer my thanks to CTC staff as well as Lori and Paul for their continued help and support as we go through the ATP development, ATP fund estimate development. Shout out to Caltrans Financial Programming as well as Caltrans Budget Fund Estimate team for everyone's flexibility and being dynamic when it comes to, as fresh information becomes available, to be able to update this information as quickly as possible to provide you the most recent updates. So I'm available for any questions you may have.
Okay, we have no public comment at this time. Commissioners, do you have any questions? Okay, seeing none, we want to thank you for this. We are going to go to item 19 now.
Commissioners, tab 19 is an informational item. Marlon Flournoy, Division Chief of Transportation Planning at Caltrans, will provide a presentation on the California Transportation Plan Draft Implementation Report. The draft implementation report details the progress made in implementing the recommendations of the California Transportation Plan 2050. At the October 2020 Commission meeting, the Commission requested that Caltrans report annually to the Commission on the status of plan implementation, and this is the first annual report. Commission staff appreciates Caltrans' commitment to implementation and their efforts to develop the report. With that, I'll turn it over to Marlon.
Great, thank you, Bridget. And just to confirm, you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Madam Chair, Commissioners, Marlon Flournoy, Division Chief of the Transportation Planning Program here at Caltrans. Very much appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all about implementation of the California Transportation Plan 2050. I also just want to state that we appreciate the cooperative and collaborative partnership that we've had with the Commission staff. I just want to tip my hat off to Laura and Bridget for just being incredible partners, and so I'm just looking forward to our continued working relationship. Next slide. All right, so as Bridget mentioned, we've been working with you guys about doing some annual reporting on the implementation of the California Transportation Plan 2050. Just as a little bit of background, the California Transportation Plan guidelines adopted by the Commission also do provide a framework for monitoring, tracking, and implementation of the statewide plan. So with this said, Caltrans is very much focused on developing a framework for tracking the CTP implementation consistent with the guidelines. The Caltrans, we're basically taking a programmatic approach to this. that will include annual reporting, as Bridget mentioned, but also building internal capacity to develop a dashboard that allows us to monitor all the different activities on a continuous basis. The report that's posted to our website, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, but it's divided into 4 different sections. The first is the importance of CTP implementation, including the importance of partnerships. It's really important to note the fact that there's this isn't Caltrans' plan, this is the state's plan, and there's a need for everyone to get involved at all levels of government, and so we're very much excited to really emphasize the need to implement this plan through partnerships. Also, we talk about the methods in the report, and this includes our approach to tracking, monitoring, and reporting progress achieved. And then there's also another section on the CTP progress, which focuses on Caltrans' highest value initiatives, showing current progress towards achieving the 14 different recommendations in the report. And then also shaping the path ahead, which includes other considerations associated with implementation, including statewide modal plans, funding programs that support CTP 2050, as well as aligning grant programs. With this first iteration of the report, we're going to be basically focusing on Caltrans actions, but future iterations will be reporting on expanded activities that include other state, regional, and local partners. So today's presentation, I'm going to be focusing really on the approach and how we're tracking progress. So next slide. All right, so the CTP implementation is divided basically into 2 parts. One is more of a qualitative report, which is more of a narrative, and it talks about major state efforts in regards to CTP implementation. And so that's what this report represents. And then the second part is more of a digital tracking platform that provides more quantitative data. So this will include progress towards the 132 CTP actions that are associated with the 14 recommendations that we have in the report. And in Caltrans right now, where staff is focused on developing that tracking platform. Throughout the course of the year, we're going to be working to finalize the dashboard and begin populating the system with Caltrans actions, but the next phase will include integrating partner agency actions. Next slide. So this is just an example of how the different actions are highlighted in the report. So there are 19 high-level initiatives that are identified in the report that demonstrate action or progress, excuse me, towards implementation. And so we're basically tracking the action, we're tracking the purpose behind the action, the status, as well as alignment with one or more of the 14 recommendations in CTP 2050. So you can see in this slide, we have the road user charge, which is one of the actions that we've identified in the report. And then you can see the purpose behind the road charge effort, the status, and then you can see that there are 2 recommendations that are aligned with this action. Next slide. And this is just an example of what our dashboard would look like. So, you know, this isn't final by any means, but this is basically the direction that we're headed in. So this will be a digital dashboard to help stakeholders track progress of achieving CTP 2050. So we'll be including key information in regards to the status of different actions, what the recommendation, the actions are associated with, and then also key performance indicators, and any potential projects that are in alignment with the recommendation. The dashboard is intended to be flexible and can be modified to accommodate different needs for internal and external partners. And any report on implementation will be updated annually or as the data becomes available. This will help increase transparency and accountability within the planning realm of the department. And staff will regularly convene meetings with partners to identify key findings and discuss annual results. Next slide. All right, so just in terms of next steps, we posted the report to our website on January the 19th. So if you go to our Caltrans CTP 2050 website, the report is posted there. We're very much looking forward to receiving your comments. Once the public review period closes on the 14th of February, then Caltrans will be moving forward to implementing the report, finalizing the report, and we'll continue to develop and begin the rollout of the dashboard. We will certainly be focused in on, once we get your comment letter, incorporating any comments that you guys have and continuing our partnership as we focus in on implementing the statewide plan. Next slide. All right, so that concludes my presentation, and happy to answer any questions that commissioners have.
Thank you so much. We have no public comment at this time. Commissioners, do you have any questions? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to item 20. Thank you so much, Mr. Flournoy, for your presentation.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, tab 20 is an action item. Commission staff has developed a proposed comment letter on the California Transportation Plan Draft Implementation Report, which is included with the item as Attachment A. The proposed comment letter details several requested changes to the draft report, which I will briefly summarize. First, Caltrans should include implementation actions, timeframes, responsible parties, and performance metrics in the report. The report should include a description of how agencies other than Caltrans are and will continue to support ongoing implementation activities. And I did want to thank Marlon for speaking to that in his presentation.
Yes, good point.
And finally, the report should articulate the role that regional transportation plans play in advancing implementation. Staff recommends the Commission approve the attached comment letter for transmittal to Caltrans.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Davis, I see you, and we have no public comment at this time. So Commissioner Davis, please move forward with your comments.
Yeah, Bridget, thank you for the summary. I just want to emphasize that as they respond to your questions, I think it becomes critical that we understand, how these projects will be approved by us, or how they'll be based, and what they're going to do with this new money that they've found, and what's the CTC's role, what are those guidelines, or what are the prerequisites, or all the requirements that if they plan on somehow spending it themselves and not running it through the CTC, what would that look like, and to make sure, as you said, that it sort of dovetails with, you're not picking pet projects, but dovetailing projects in that make the most sense to create a better transportation system in our state with all the equity that we talk about all the time. So I appreciate your work on this, and I would just ask that you continue to bird dog and monitor these responses, and let our chair and co-chair know, or all of us individually as you see fit. But I'm deeply concerned about the fact that there's new money that would appear that the Transportation Commission is not going to be sort of responsible for doing what our job has appeared to have been for quite some time. So I don't know if you have any comments you want to make about that thought, but I appreciate the work you're doing to watch this.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Davis, for that comment. I wanted to make a couple of quick points. One is that we will be asking Caltrans to return to the March Commission meeting to talk about how they have incorporated our comments into the final report. And as Marlon mentioned, this will be an annual report to the Commission, so we will have that regular interface. And finally, the commission does maintain guidelines for the preparation of the California Transportation Plan. So we'll be talking internally to figure out when the next update makes sense for those guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Seeing that we have no other comments from commissioners, I want to thank you, Bridget, and look forward to the conversation in March.
Great.
Madam Chair, this is an action item.
Okay, I was going to move to that. We need a motion to support the letter and approve the letter as written.
So move.
I hear Commissioner Davis. Was that Lou's second?
Sure.
Great. Douglas, could you please read the roll?
Commissioner Alvarado,
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Eager,
Aye.
Commissioner Falcone,
Aye.
Commissioner Grisby,
Aye.
Commissioner Guardino,
Aye.
Commissioner Inman,
Aye.
Commissioner Liu,
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez,
Aye.
Commissioner Tavaloni.
Aye.
Thank you. Chair Norton.
Aye.
Chair, the motion is approved.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Falcone, did you wish to speak on this particular item that we just missed?
Oh, it was just a quick question, Madam Chair. Thank you so much. Just for Bridget, and it kind of dovetails on Commissioner Davis's comments on reporting. If we anticipate, kind of a regular cadence of, reporting back to the commission and commissioner, just to, track progress on these items that we are requesting to be incorporated on their CTP.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that we'll be able to hear an update at the next commission meeting in March from Caltrans, and then annual updates moving forward on their progress towards implementation.
Okay, annual. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that approval of the item unanimously, we're going to go to item 21, the Caltrans Efficiencies Report.
Thanks, Chair Norton. I'm hoping that everyone can hear me okay.
We can.
Commissioners, item 21 is an informational item. SB1 amended the Streets and Highways Code to include a requirement that Caltrans implement efficiency measures with the goal to generate at least $100 million per year in savings to invest in maintenance and rehabilitation of the state highway system, and that these savings be reported to the Commission. Caltrans was scheduled to present the 2021 efficiencies report at the December 21 meeting. However, it was agreed to defer this presentation until January. CTC staff prepared an assessment of the efficiencies report, which is included in the meeting materials as a yellow book item and attachment. Angel Pyle, Caltrans SB1 Program Manager, is here today to provide a presentation on the Caltrans efficiencies report. I'll turn it over to Angel.
Thank you, Angel. Thank you, Tim.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Mic check. Are we good?
Okay. You're great. Thanks.
All right. Fantastic. Let me go ahead and bring up my notes, and thank you so much for bringing up the presentation. So good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners, and Executive Director Weiss. My name is Angel Pyle, and I'm fortunate to be the SB1 Program Manager for the department. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today in person. Well, I guess it was slated for December, so it was in person then, but I appreciate speaking with you nevertheless today, virtually. And I want to discuss a few of the great things the department is continuing to do in order to be more efficient. As a friendly reminder, the department is required to achieve $100 million in savings annually as a result of the passage of SB1. We're truly fortunate as Caltrans has over 20,000 employees who come to work every day to add value and figure out how to serve the taxpayers more effectively. We had over 150 individuals who contributed to this year's efficiencies, and we have exceeded our goal for the 4th year in a row as a result of their contributions. I'd also like to mention a lot of care and diligence is taken in the compilation and subsequent review of the department's annual efficiency report. I apologize for not having the report to the Commission on November 1st, and we certainly appreciate the Commission's patience in that. The department has worked tirelessly to accurately identify and review the information for this year's report and sharing information with CTC staff along the way. We appreciate the acknowledgement from the Commission that the report has improved. We do value our relationship with the CTC as well as the analysis and feedback provided, and this will assist us in improving the report even further. Today, I'm here to provide a high-level overview of the report, as well as highlighting a couple of the efficiencies the department has implemented over the last year. Could we move to the next slide, please? So here I will explain briefly a more refined organization of the report, the total dollars saved, and also a couple of efficiency highlights. Could we slide change one more time, please? All right, so as we continue to capture and report on efficiencies each year, we continue efforts to present the information clearly and accurately. This year's approach includes 3 types of efficiencies: Type 1, Type 2, and Type 3. Type 1 efficiencies are counted towards the SB1 goal of $100 million in yearly savings. Type 2 efficiencies count towards the overall efficiencies totals. And Type 3 efficiencies include good practices the department utilized but may not be easily quantified or may not meet some of the definitions that we utilize in evaluating efficiencies for SB1 purposes. Could we have a slide change, please? This is the 4th year in a row the department has reported efficiencies. As you can see from the slide here, we've continued to increase the number of efficiencies from year to year. For fiscal year 2021, the department has $386 million in total efficiencies, with $177 million in efficiencies towards the SB1 requirement. Our continued success is due to the hard work and support by Caltrans leadership and staff, and we can't thank our team at Caltrans enough for being part of a culture that embraces good stewardship. Slide change, please. The first highlight I'd like to share is the municipal grant. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I going too fast for the interpreters? Sorry. Okay, I'll try to slow down just a little bit. Sorry about that. The first highlight I would like to share is the Municipal Coordination Grant Program. This efficiency utilizes partnering with local municipalities to share the costs and benefits of stormwater treatment infrastructure. As an example, through this process, the department may partner with a local municipality to construct a stormwater treatment device, which benefits both the state highway system and the local municipality. This provides stormwater treatment benefits to both partners. I'm happy to report the department saved over $50 million utilizing this strategy. Next slide, please. It is very likely you have seen this next efficiency yourself throughout the state as we highlight our high reflective materials for striping. This innovative striping material saves time, money, and enhances visibility for road users. So you may have noticed in traveling throughout the state that this is a new 6-inch wide stripe that uses a highly reflective thermoplastic or tape and lasts up to 6 years compared to 1 year of paint. And lasts up to 6 years compared to 1 year using 4-inch wide paint. Longer life means decreased maintenance costs and a reduced inconvenience for drivers and improved safety by keeping our crews off the road repainting. I'm happy to report Caltrans saved $34 million in last fiscal year and over $113 million since the passage of SB1 in 2017 as a result of this efficiency. Next slide, please. So this concludes my overview of this year's report. I'd also like to highlight that SB1 is doing fantastic things across the state. I plan to return in March with highlights of 2 or 3 projects to share with the Commission and to demonstrate the projects your votes make possible. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angel. This is a really great presentation, and I wanted to have Tim walk us through the recommendations and have us ask any questions. I believe we have 1 public comment, so let's get to that public comment before we get to Tim's observations. Justin?
Thank you, Chair Norton. We do have 1 attendee with their hand raised at this time. We have Constantine Kontaxis.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair Norton and Commissioners. My name is Constantine Kontaxis, and I'm a professional engineer previously employed at Caltrans for 21 years, and specifically both Caltrans District 11 and Headquarters Stormwater Program for 12. The issue I have with these claimed stormwater efficiencies are not my personal opinion or just a difference in opinion. I have either worked on, developed, and or implemented these practices while working for the Headquarters Stormwater Program. Before leaving state service in 2019, I was the lead Caltrans permit negotiator with the State Water Resource Control Board where we discussed these specific practices. I believe there is a misunderstanding between my concerns and Caltrans' responses to these concerns. SB1 legislation requires efficiencies that redirect resource savings to the maintenance and rehabilitation of the state highway system. Caltrans has calculated these stormwater efficiencies based on compliance units approved by the state board. My position, as well as the regulators, have always been that the compliance units are a performance measure, and the legal project requirements for said watershed is waste load allocation reduction. Even if the regulator concurs that you met the number of compliance units as a performance measure, you still have to meet the legal waste load reduction in a given watershed. Caltrans is calculating SB1 efficiencies by using compliance units adjusted BMP cost agreed on by the regulators for a performance measure, but not required permit waste load reduction. I provided Caltrans a copy of an email exchange where I posed the same question to the San Francisco Bay Area Regional Board Executive Director Tom Mumley in this last report. Regarding the OGFC projects claimed, his response was, and I'll quote, "Caltrans continues to make erroneous assertions," end of quote. He also stated that Caltrans must provide explicit data for OGFC in order to meet their permit waste load allocation requirements, which has not been done to date. Compliance units and waste load allocation and waste load reductions are not one-to-one, and there has been no documentation to date what that conversion equates to. Per the Caltrans permit, each regional board would have to determine what is the waste load reduction requirement and compare it to those claimed OGFC or municipal coordination projects to determine its equivalency. My professional opinion is that it will be a mere fraction of the compliant credits claimed in this SB1 report. Projects costs that were claimed as efficiencies are not equivalent to projects required to reduce the waste load allocation in a given watershed. To meet the given permit waste load allocation reduction requirement for a given watershed, Caltrans cannot simply claim that they met an annual performance measure of CUs or compliance units. They must show with explicit data how these projects reduced waste load reduction requirements. Caltrans has never answered a simple question of how do the compliance units used translate to waste load reduction requirements. If these are true efficiencies as claimed, Caltrans should be able to show this with regional board concurrence. Since Caltrans is not receiving the specific reduction in waste load to a given watershed, they will need to provide the requirements. A minor reduction with units, but a one-to-one is claimed. Per Caltrans' own documents, project plan guide, the project required stormwater data report, specific monitoring data, these projects were not even evaluated as required by the department. Throughout my correspondence, I have copied the CTC Executive Director and the Independent Audits and Investigation Unit and have no response from either and never have been asked for any clarification or understanding of my concerns. This leads me to believe that the misunderstanding that Caltrans had translated to these entities as well. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I wanted to see if, Angel, you wanted to respond to this speaker, and then Tim, since it's an informational item, just maybe have a roll-up recommendation about the efficiencies report. Ms. Pyle?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for your comments, Mr. Contaxis. We certainly do appreciate your perspective. The department stands behind the practice of open grade friction course and the use of that, and it's a proven practice which has been grounded in data and approved by the statewide Stormwater Quality Control Board and provides significant environmental benefits. The department, though, certainly respects what your perspective is, and we'd be happy to meet further, talk about the information that's been provided to you, and walk you through the information that we have provided to the state water board in order to assist us in getting to a common understanding on this. So we would be happy to work with you further.
Excellent. Thank you so much. With that, Tim, can you give us sort of a roll-up recommendation about the efficiencies report for us today?
Sure. Just a brief overview of our assessment. The commission staff found the level of detail provided for the basis of the efficiency savings has been significantly improved from the prior year's report. And Caltrans also has reported on a number of excellent efficiencies, many of which are continued practices from prior years. Commission staff did identify a number of type 1 efficiencies that seem more appropriate to be listed as type 2 efficiencies, but still feels that they are efficiencies that could be reported, just not necessarily towards the SB1 requirement.
Thank you. With that, since there are no other comments, I think we'll move on to item 22. Thank you so
Madam
much.
Chair.
Appreciate your
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Now, Tim, item 22, the update on the State Route 710 Northern Stub relinquishment.
Sure. Commissioners, item 22 is an informational item. Caltrans is here to present on an overview and an update of the proposed relinquishment on State Route 710. Tony Tavares, Caltrans District 7 Director, is here to provide the presentation. And I will turn it over to Tony as soon as I see him pop up. Tony, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners, Executive Director Weiss, and Commission staff. As mentioned, I'm Tony Tavares. I'm the District 7 Director. And today I have the great opportunity to present item 22, which is an informational item for the Commission. And I appreciate this opportunity to brief the Commission on this informational item for a proposed relinquishment between the state of California and the city of Pasadena. Caltrans has been partnering with the city of Pasadena in setting forth the parameters and a process for relinquishment of a section of State Route 710, specifically the 710 North Stub. And we're relinquishing that from the state to the city of Pasadena, obviously in accordance with state and federal laws and regulations. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Ms. Laura Canejo and her entire team at the city of Pasadena for their productive and very meaningful dialogue that we have had, and as we progress through the various requirements to envision this relinquishment a reality. And in my opinion, I truly believe this relinquishment can have great significance, not only for the region, Los Angeles County, Southern California, but also for our entire state. If ultimately approved by the Commission, the transfer of this portion of the state highway to a local roadway will improve equity and remove transportation barriers that currently exist. The relinquishment will provide local ownership and begin the process of reconnecting, rebuilding, and reestablishing communities. Next slide, please. This slide depicts the history basically from the neighborhood to where it is today as a highway. More than half a century ago, the department began acquiring residential and commercial properties to construct the State Route 710, 134, and 210 interchange. This area includes the State Route 710 North Stub that is being proposed for relinquishment. And you can see that in 1965, this was predominantly residential and commercial properties. And over a period of 9 years, it turned into that interchange in 1974. The lower left-hand corner is the configuration of State Route 710 through the city of Pasadena. Next slide, please. In May 2017, the Los Angeles Metro Board adopted the TSM TDM as a locally preferred alternative for State Route 710 North Study. And that's a transportation system management, transportation demand management strategy. And in November 2018, Caltrans identified the TSM TDM strategy as the preferred alternative in the environmental document. In September 2019, legislation was established that subject to an agreement and determination by the California Transportation Commission, the State Route 710 North Stub may be relinquished to the City of Pasadena. Next slide. This slide and the aerial photo on the right shows the basic limits of the proposed relinquishment. The limits of the proposed relinquishment are from approximately Union Street as the north limit to California Boulevard as the south limit. Next slide, please. Various assessments, documents, and reports are required to complete a relinquishment process, and it's a very involved process. However, we have multiple groups within Caltrans and working with the City of Pasadena and others as well to deliver these actions. I will say that Caltrans is laser focused on completing this process as quickly as possible, and our goal to complete all of these actions and to return to the CTC sometime this summer to present the relinquishment for your approval. Next slide. As mentioned, Caltrans has been partnering with the City of Pasadena, but we've also been working very closely in partnering with other stakeholders, the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, LA Metro, Southern California Association of Governments, SCAG, and obviously the California Transportation Commission. And there are numerous utility companies and other stakeholders that we have been coordinating with as well. This cannot happen without partnerships and the coordination, collaboration that takes place. And we're very appreciative of all of these individuals and groups who are working with us on this issue. Next slide. This concludes my brief presentation, and I appreciate this opportunity to present this informational item this afternoon. I am available to answer any questions, and I believe we may also have Ms. Coneo from the City of Pasadena to also assist with some of the questions.
Great. Tim, I believe we have some public comment before we take on some of this. Is that the case?
Okay. Yes, thank you, Chair Norton. We do have public comment at this time. Up first, we have Councilmember Steve Matson.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Chair Norton, commissioners and staff. And I first and foremost wanted to just echo, I'm sure, some comments from earlier in the day, commending and recognizing Secretary Kim on his fantastic career and all his contributions. He's been a friend and a colleague, and we're grateful for his efforts. I also want to commend and express publicly our gratitude to District 7 Director Tavares, who's been terrific to work with. And I would echo his words in terms of the strong and very vital and important partnership that we've enjoyed with the director and with Caltrans for the City of Pasadena. I know our Transportation Director, Laura Cornejo, is well known to you and will speak, I expect, here momentarily. But I do just want to state that, for us, this is an important opportunity. As I think all of you know, some 70 years ago when the state acquired this property, there were communities of color and historic communities that were actually displaced from what we now think of as the 710 North Stub. And we're anxious and excited about the opportunity to continue to work with the state and through this process of relinquishment, be able to repatriate some of those communities, to provide affordable housing, to provide environmental justice and livable, affordable communities, achieve transportation goals. And it's just great that I think as a city, our values are really on all fours with those of the commission and of the administration and Caltrans. So many, many thanks. We're excited post-relinquishment to have a very robust planning process. It'll be totally transparent and vigorous. And I warrant you that we will work extremely hard to deserve this opportunity of relinquishment if in fact it is determined to occur. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your longstanding leadership in Pasadena and for your support in this particular item. Our next public commenter.
Up next, we have SCAG Executive Director Kome Ajisi.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Kome Ajisi, the Executive Director at the Southern California Association of Governments. Really a privilege to be here with you to speak on behalf of this project. I want to take a moment to, first of all, congratulate Chair Eager and Vice Chair Gordina for their earlier election, and looking forward to their time. And thank you, Madam Chair, for your leadership. I should take a moment of personal privilege again to wish Secretary Kim well for his service, and also to note, because Commissioner Inman did mention about my phone, my telephone, my cell phone, that he was very gracious about the many times he got wrong calls looking for me on that phone. So I appreciate that mention, and we will miss him. You know, Commissioners, it's been very clearly documented that the historical and rapid expansion of the freeway system in the mid-20th century, especially in Southern California, resulted in physical barriers that divided our communities and amplified both racial and income inequities. We're now at every level of government, the momentum and the desire, and indeed probably funding opportunity to reconnect these communities in order to address and mitigate those missteps of the past. With this in mind, it is my pleasure to speak today in support of the relinquishment of the State Route 710 North Stub to the City of Pasadena. SCAG supports the successful development of a relinquishment agreement between the city and Caltrans, leading to a subsequent relinquishment determination by the Commission. I want to recognize the exemplary collaborative nature of the work between the city and the department on behalf of the overlapping constituencies that they serve. The city and the department laid the foundation for the relinquishment agreement by completing the technical feasibility study and the traffic analysis for the removal of the 710 stub and the connector roads. I also want to particularly recognize both the leadership of Tony Tavares in his support of the city's effort, as well as the leadership of the Pasadena City Council and city staff, particularly Ms. Laura Conejo, in seeking to reknit the fabric of their community. I want to assure you that SCAG will be there fully supporting the city's subsequent effort to pursue a robust and community-driven visioning and planning process that we expect will repair and rebuild and create a better functioning urban space for the people that live in that community. So with that, Madam Chair, again, thank you for your leadership on this, and as always, really privileged to be before you representing this particular item on the agenda.
Thank you so much. We are looking forward to other speakers as well, but Kome, it's great that you are front and center on this, and we are looking forward to seeing this really meet the goals of the Highways to Boulevards program to its fullest. So
absolutely,
thank you
and very, very consistent with our regional plans, with our Connect SoCal. So we really appreciate what's going on. And I think, Madam Chair, if I may be so bold, this is an example of how we can pursue this relinquishment. I was fortunate to have been in the department working on relinquishments a few years before, and it had been very difficult. So when this comes through, I think you would see that it's an example of collaboration that we need to see between the state and local communities and allow for some local control.
Great. Thank you so much. I was working with Senator Portantino. He's eager to speak on this item as well. Are you in now, Senator Portantino?
Chair Norton, I would just like to check and see if Christy Lopez is here to speak.
I'm here.
Okay, that's fine. However you want to, I thought he was ready to go, but that's fine. However you want to put it out there.
I am here.
Ah, fantastic.
Can you hear me?
We can. You're a little bit like in a tunnel, but we can hear you.
Okay, I don't know why. I apologize. Let me mute. Okay, now you can hear me. All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, Chair Norton, I just want to congratulate you on your tenure as chair and congratulate the incoming officers as well. Thank you for all of your help in coming to the district and looking at this issue personally. And I know other board members have come and taken the tour and seen how important it is to get this property in the hands of the cities. Obviously, SB7, which we collaborated with the governor's office on, and CTC and Caltrans, and most importantly, the city of Pasadena, giving them the right to negotiate to acquire this stub. I was proud and pleased to author SB7 and see that come to fruition, and strongly encourage the CTC and this collaboration. And certainly Tony Tavares has been a great partner as well. It's exciting to see the plans that Pasadena has for the stub, and to know that they've been given the ability to negotiate directly to acquire that stub. I just wanted to wholeheartedly support that effort as obviously the senator of the region and as somebody who's collaborated with all the parties to get us this far. And thank you all for your collaboration, and certainly wish the new chair and vice chair well as we move forward and get this property rightfully belongs in the hands of Pasadena so they can do great things with it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Senator Portantino. Do we have a next public comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair Norton. We do have more attendees looking to make public comment at this time. Up next, we have Mark Gallatin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Commissioners and staff. My name is Mark Gallatin, President of the South Pasadena Preservation Foundation. One of the central goals of our foundation is the restoration and preservation of historic neighborhoods, particularly those that have been impacted by past transportation planning decisions. Our foundation stands with 17 other community organizations in supporting the relinquishment of the 710 stub and adjacent local streets currently owned by Caltrans to the city of Pasadena. For 45 years, residents of the corridor have suffered from local streets that have languished over time while not under local control. Among the many concerns are dangerous speeding in residential neighborhoods with schools, businesses, and public spaces present. These safety issues have been a constant since the streets were converted from two-way to one-way and not designed to safely accommodate the many pedestrians who frequent the neighborhood. Located in the middle of a vibrant neighborhood, existing conditions along these state-owned streets include deteriorating asphalt sidewalks, missing curb ramps, and unstriped pedestrian crossings. Thankfully, the process of relinquishing Caltrans-operated local streets back to a local jurisdiction is a well-established process that the agency executes for cities across the state on a regular basis. It is not complex like taking a segment of state highway, such as the 710 stub. Because historic neighborhoods in South Pasadena in proximity to the corridor are impacted by the temporary design of these streets, I urge you to expedite this element of the request in advance of the decision-making surrounding the 60-plus acres of the stub. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Justin, are there other public comments?
Yes, thank you, Chair Norton. Up next, we have Jenny Bright.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much, Chair Norton. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today. My name is Jenny Bright, and I'm the organizer of the Oak Lawn Neighborhood Improvement Group located in the city of South Pasadena. We would like to say that we are in favor of relinquishing the SR 710 stub and adjacent streets owned by Caltrans, and thank you so much for advancing this. We live at ground zero for hostile traffic in South Pasadena, which is shared with our Pasadena neighbors. This hostile traffic comes directly from the stub at California Boulevard and pushes into our residential streets, further facilitated through Waze and Google Maps. These are not commercial roadways. These are our residential streets. You've all mentioned here today that you are committed to safety and to complete streets. We need both of these to calm the extremely hostile traffic which the residents, parks, and schools here have been suffering with for the last 45 years. Metro's Measure R money has already been allocated to do this type of project, and we ask for the commissions and Caltrans to achieve these priorities and return our communities to their residential character with safer streets and to relieve our residential neighborhoods from this freeway traffic. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much. Justin, are there other public comments?
Yes, Chair Norton. Up next, we have Tim Iverson.
Hi, my name is Tim. I'm a Pasadena resident. Yeah, on South Pasadena Avenue, which is part of the project area of this relinquishment. I'd like to thank Director Amashekin for his earlier comments regarding the department's commitment to complete streets, and to Director Tavares for his comments regarding the attention and urgency that the department has given to the relinquishment issue. Indeed, I hope that the same commitment to equity and care can be given to the upcoming 710 corridor sales program in relation to the housing. But of course, today we're talking about local streets, and today I'd like to address St. John's and South Pasadena Avenue in particular, both south of California Boulevard. Since the Wishbone opened in 1976, residents of Pasadena and St. John Avenues have consistently expressed their concerns about its impact on health and safety. Among the many concerns are the frequent accidents at the intersection of Glenarm and South Pasadena, where it is not uncommon to find multi-car accidents, hubcaps and bumpers strewn on the sidewalk, cars up on the curb spun out into oncoming traffic, even up on the front lawn of houses facing the avenue. This is aside from the daily experience of street racing at night and dangerous speeding during the day. You know, I mean, some interim things have been done. We have policing in the morning and at various times during the day to try to dampen speeding. But as soon as those motorcycle cops are gone, the speed goes up immediately. And I just want to make sure that this portion of the project area gets the attention that it needs, and that St. John, South Pasadena Avenue, all the way into South Pasadena, is considered to be an integral part of the solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next public comment.
Up next, we have Carter Rubin.
Hey, Carter. Good to hear you.
Good afternoon, Chair Norton and commissioners. I was planning to speak on the next item, but hearing some of the comments from residents of South Pass and Pasadena, I wanted to make sure that they knew about Assembly Bill 773 that passed last year, which allows cities to adopt slow streets plans, which would designate certain streets as local traffic only, with the intention to support, safe walking and biking corridors. That may be something you all want to look into as a potential option for dealing with cut-through traffic from people using navigation apps. So I'm delighted to see the 710 North project no longer in the works as well. And we'll look forward to talking more about the SHOP program when that's next.
Great. Thank you very much, Carter. Are there any other public commenters today?
Chair Norton, we have one more attendee, Laura Rubio Cornejo. I wanted to ensure that she was just on to answer questions and is not needed to actually comment at this time.
Okay. Commissioners, do you have any questions? I have a couple, and I see Commissioner Liu. So Commissioner Liu, please ask your questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question relates, we just got a list of STIP projects that included highway to boulevard projects, and the Metro list does not include this as a highway to boulevard project for the 2022 STIP, if I'm reading it right. I guess my question is, would this qualify, and if so, why doesn't Metro have it on its list?
If I can jump in real quick, I think that's really a question to ask Metro at the STIP hearing. would it qualify? We didn't put any definitions on it. So I would say, yes, it certainly seems like it would qualify. It was just a very broad kind of what might be qualified.
I think Patricia's still listening, so that's a question I have for you, or anyone else at Metro. Please let me know.
Mhm. Is that your
Patricia Chan at this time?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, Commissioner. We'll be happy to address the question during the STIP hearing next Thursday and be happy to work with staff or offline as necessary to address any questions.
Great. That's wonderful. Thank you. I have a question about transit around the relinquishment area and the ways that this may help benefit some of the projects that are being determined for transit in and around this area, namely the Pasadena to North Hollywood BRT, which is expected to go through this. And I was wondering if Laura Cornejo could talk a little bit about other opportunities to reduce single occupant vehicle traffic and improve transit and additional accessibility, especially in and around Northwest Pasadena.
Hi, Madam Chair, can you hear me?
We sure can. Thank you so much, Laura.
Great, thank you. First, I just want to thank the Commission for taking the time to receive this report. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Director Tavares' leadership on this. And so really appreciate the time given to this really important effort we have underway. To address your question, Madam Chair, the City of Pasadena is very much committed to ensuring that we implement an integrated and multimodal transportation network that connects not just to the highway system that is there, but also to the regional transportation system and the transit network. And so some of the things that, you know, we'd like to think about is how we can transform both St. John and Pasadena Avenue into being complete streets, providing enhanced bus service, and really even having a mobility hub that is multimodal in nature, that can provide the connectivity and provide options for residents and visitors of the area. We have within our general plan mobility element, one of our stated goals is that Pasadena will be a city where people can circulate without cars, and we are very much committed to seeing that through post-relinquishment.
Well, thank you. The mobility hub mention is, of course, music to my ears, and it's certainly one of the thoughts about how the funds were supposed to be distributed regarding moving away from highways and expanding to more localized transportation. So this is very helpful to hear. Tim Sullivan, I think you had wanted to speak on this item.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Norton. I had one question for Tony, and I was wondering if we could go back to your presentation and look at the list of things that need to be done. Are we able to go back on that presentation? I know you don't have control of it. I'm hoping someone on our side. Okay, so I was just curious. I mean, there are a lot of moving parts, and this is a very complicated one in itself. And I was just curious if you had kind of a ballpark schedule, you know, maybe a range of dates of when you are anticipating certain things to be done.
Yeah, absolutely, Tim. Thank you for that question. So as we're looking at these 7 items here, there's obviously some sub-actions related to each item, but I will say item number 1 has been completed already. Items 2 and 3 already in progress and well on their way. I think when we look at these 7 lists of items, in my mind, the environmental document becomes the critical path. And that's the area where we have the ability, I think, working with several of our external regulatory partners to adjust the timeline. There are some assessments and studies that are being requested of Caltrans in order to have a finalized and approved environmental document. And I know we're having very in-depth discussions with those regulatory partners to validate the needs for some of these studies and assessments. So that's where I think we have the most opportunity of shaving off some of the time there. I have a timeline, a very conservative timeline that worst case scenario type timeline that would take us from a year from today. I believe we can bring that into the summer, and as long as all the moving parts are completed and many of these items are moving simultaneously.
I have another question for Director Tavares and for Laura Cornejo, and that is about the Highways to Boulevards program, not just with the federal government, but now some funding that's been proposed in Governor Newsom's budget, and how you see lining up the timelines and guidelines for those programs with the work you're doing right now.
Certainly, Chair Norton, that's one of my reasons for really trying to bring this in as quickly as possible, so that then the city can take advantage of some of those funds that are going hopefully be available through the state, but also definitely available through the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed by the president in November. So I have the goal of bringing this back this summer. Hopefully, I don't want to select the July but most likely the September CTC meeting, maybe even earlier if we can bring it in there and make us as competitive as possible for any state and definitely those federal funds. I think this project could be a model, as I was intending to mention earlier in the presentation, a model not only for the state, but we could set the baseline or the standard for the entire nation.
Right. Your dogs seem to think it's a great project too.
Yeah, yes, they do.
Tim, are there any other comments that you have about the project or questions you may have before we move on?
No, I'm good. Thank you. I was on mute. Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Of course. Well, I want to thank you all for this update, and we look forward to tracking this as we try to meet some of the guidelines about other funding that might be very appropriate for this particular project. Thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate the hard work that everybody's putting into this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manager.
Absolutely. And with that, I will say that I think it's time for a small break for our commission. And so I'd like us to meet back at 3:45 to take up the balance of the agenda for today. Thank you very much.